The flight attendant's voice cut through the cabin, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, I must request once again that you move to the rear of the aircraft. If not, I will be forced to notify the security team." Jessica, the chief flight attendant, spoke clearly and calmly, though a flicker of tension danced in her eyes. Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, looked up from her seat, her demeanor confident and unshaken. "I've made it clear. I'm not moving," she replied, her voice steady, yet laced with a quiet strength. Despite the awkwardness of the situation, with all eyes on her, no one could have predicted the revelation that was about to come to light. Before we dive into what happened next, take a moment to comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss any of the latest stories. The airplane glistened under the afternoon sun, its sleek design promising a smooth and comfortable flight. Inside, the cabin oozed luxury, premium leather seats, elegant gold accents, and an ambience that made every passenger feel special. Travelers moved with ease, designer suitcases in tow, as they were guided to their seats. Some settled in quickly, checking their phones. Others relaxed, sipping champagne offered by the flight attendants. Soft background music played gently through the cabin. Among the passengers was Karoline Leavitt, dressed in a tailored navy blazer that spoke volumes of understated elegance. She moved with quiet assurance, not seeking attention, though her presence drew a few curious glances. As the White House press secretary, her face was a familiar one in the media, and several passengers whispered as they recognized her. Karoline scanned the cabin briefly before making her way to her seat. This flight was tied to important government business, though no one suspected just how much deeper her connection to this trip really was. Jessica, the chief flight attendant, stood near the entrance, her uniform impeccably fitted, sharp features radiating professionalism. She greeted each passenger with a warm smile and a friendly welcome aboard. For some, her welcome was genuine, but when it came to Karoline Leavitt, her greeting was brief and impersonal. "Welcome aboard," delivered in a cool, almost detached tone, though still maintaining the bare minimum of professional courtesy. Behind Karoline were Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, an elderly couple who exuded the air of seasoned travelers. Mrs. Henderson clutched a small knitted bag, her fingers already poised to begin the familiar task of knitting. Mr. Henderson held a neatly folded newspaper, his eyes briefly scanning the cabin with mild curiosity. Jessica flashed a bright smile and greeted them warmly. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson. So nice to have you both with us again. Everything all right? Do you need any assistance before takeoff?" Mrs. Henderson shook her head gently, already absorbed in her knitting. Mr. Henderson nodded toward his coffee cup, signaling his satisfaction. But when Jessica passed Karoline, she glanced briefly at the bag neatly stowed under her seat, offering no assistance or service. She moved past with barely a glance, maintaining a neutral, yet distinctly unfriendly demeanor. Karoline noticed a difference in Jessica's treatment, but remained composed, her eyes sharp and observant of the subtle cues. Jessica Miller, in her 40s, always kept a polished appearance, her uniform crisp, her hair neatly styled. Confident in her role as chief flight attendant, she had a keen eye for managing the passengers. When she saw Karoline take her seat, Jessica's gaze narrowed slightly. She recognized her immediately. Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, a prominent conservative known for her firm stance against the liberal values Jessica supported, like LGBTQ rights and open immigration policies. Karoline's presence irked Jessica, but not because of her behavior. It was because Jessica saw her as a symbol of the ideals that clashed with her own progressive beliefs. Jessica approached with a brisk stride, her smile polite but forced. "Miss Leavitt, I'm sorry, but I believe there's been a mix-up with your seating," she said, her tone gentle but edged with strain. Karoline looked up, her expression calm and collected. "I believe this is my seat," she replied, her voice firm. Jessica maintained her smile, her tone even. "This area is reserved for special passengers. I just want to make sure everything follows procedure." Nearby passengers began to take notice, many already recognizing Karoline from her public profile. An older woman with meticulously styled hair leaned forward, watching with keen curiosity. A businessman across the aisle furrowed his brow slightly, clearly uncomfortable with Jessica's tone. Karoline remained composed, her gaze steady on Jessica. "I suggest you check the passenger list before jumping to conclusions," she said, her voice strong but not harsh. Jessica raised an eyebrow but kept her tone professional. I'm familiar with the list. I just want to confirm. The atmosphere in the cabin grew tense. Whispers rippled through the passengers. That's Karoline Leavitt, one murmured. What's going on? Another shrugged. Maybe she really wants a VIP section. Jessica stood tall, her voice clear and firm. If you don't move to the rear, I'll have to notify security. Karoline tilted her head slightly, her expression unchanged. Do what you feel you must, but I'm not moving, she replied. The older woman let out a soft gasp, and the businessman leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Frustrated, Jessica turned to Emily, a nearby junior attendant. Emily, please assist Miss Leavitt to the rear, she said, her tone sharp but still polite. Emily hesitated, her eyes darting between the two women. She wanted to suggest checking the list, as Karoline had hinted, but Jessica's stern look made her falter. After a moment, Emily nodded reluctantly and stepped forward. Karoline shifted in her seat slightly. You should think this through, she said quietly, her words carrying a weight that was hard to ignore. Jessica's voice remained calm. I'm doing my job. Please cooperate, she replied, pointing toward the back. This area isn't suitable for you, Miss Leavitt. The passengers watched in tense silence as Karoline leaned back in her seat. Don't be so quick to judge, she said, her tone low but firm. Jessica kept her voice steady. I'm just ensuring the rules are followed. Karoline pulled out her phone, her fingers quickly tapping away to send a message resting her arm on the armrest. Karoline's voice remained calm as she spoke. You're making a mistake, she said, her gaze steady. Jessica ignored her, her tone unwavering. We'll see, she replied, gesturing for Emily to approach. Emily hesitated, still unsure, but Jessica spoke again, her voice carrying across the cabin. Miss Leavitt, this is my final request. Please move to the rear, or I'll call security. Karoline met her gaze, her tone commanding. I've already told you, I'm not going anywhere. From behind them, the older woman whispered, She's so well known. Why make this difficult? Jessica seized the opportunity, turning toward the other passengers. The rules apply to everyone, she said, seeking their silent support. Karoline didn't react to the jab. She simply stared at Jessica, her silent challenge clear and unwavering. Emily, still uncertain, approached the manifest near the cockpit, her hands trembling. Jessica cut her off sharply. Emily, I've got this. No need to check further. Emily stepped back, her face flushed with discomfort. The businessman across the aisle leaned forward, concern in his voice. You okay, Miss Leavitt? He asked gently. Karoline smiled faintly. I'm fine, thank you. Jessica, not wanting any distractions, interjected. Ladies and gentlemen, please don't interfere. The businessman frowned, shaking his head. It looks like you're the one stirring up trouble, he said, his voice tinged with disapproval. Jessica's cheeks flushed with irritation. She turned back to Karoline. I've been patient enough. Move, or I'll request assistance, she said, her voice strained. Karoline's response was cool and unflinching. Go ahead and try. The calmness in Karoline's voice only fueled Jessica's frustration, but she walked off without another word, resuming her duties. Her frustration was evident as she moved down the aisle, serving water to the Hendersons first and then the passengers in the rear, always attentive. Yet when she passed Karoline's seat, she deliberately ignored her. By the time the tray was nearly empty, Karoline finally spoke, her tone polite. Excuse me, could I have a glass of water? Jessica paused for a moment, glancing at Karoline with a neutral expression. I'll get it for you when I can, Miss Leavitt, she replied curtly. Then, with a hint of sarcasm, she added, though I suppose someone like you, from the White House, doesn't need our service, before moving on without another word. Karoline watched her go, her eyes narrowing slightly as she caught the veiled jab, a clear reference to her conservative stance. A moment later, Karoline adjusted her position, stretching her legs slightly into the aisle for comfort. Jessica returned soon after, tray in hand. She immediately noticed the change in Karoline's position and the way her legs were now extending into the aisle. Without a word, Jessica abruptly changed direction, her movement swift and deliberate. In an instant, her foot collided with Karoline's, causing the tray to tilt and a glass of water to spill across Karoline's lap, splashing onto the floor. Jessica stopped, her voice rising but still maintaining professionalism. Please keep your feet within your seat area to avoid inconvenience. Passengers around them turned, startled by the sudden incident. Karoline looked up, momentarily surprised, but remained composed, brushing the water off her pants. "But you bumped into me," she said, her voice steady. Karoline tilted her head slightly, her gaze unwavering. "I just want to be treated fairly, like everyone else. If that's too much, the problem isn't mine," she added, her words sharp but controlled. Jessica flushed, stepping closer, her voice polite but strained. "Miss Leavitt, I'm trying to serve all passengers to the best of my ability." Then, in a brief moment of frustration, unable to suppress her mounting irritation, Jessica raised a hand and slapped Karoline hard across the face. The sound of the slap echoed through the cabin, leaving the passengers stunned. The businessman across the aisle half-stood, his face a mix of shock and anger. Emily, the junior attendant, covered her mouth, her eyes wide with panic. The older woman with the meticulously styled hair froze, her earlier smirk vanishing entirely. Karoline slowly straightened, resting her hand lightly on her lap. Her expression remained calm, unwavering. She met Jessica's gaze with a look so intense it caused Jessica to falter for a moment. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," Karoline said quietly, her voice low but slicing through the tense silence. Karoline locked eyes with Jessica. "I've been patient, but this crosses a line," she said, each word firm and deliberate. Jessica clenched her fists, her jaw tightening. "I won't tolerate being criticized while doing my job," she snapped, her voice sharp but still holding on to professionalism. Karoline didn't flinch, nor did she touch her face or react in anger. She sat up taller, her eyes never leaving Jessica's. "You'll regret that," she said, her voice deep and authoritative, resonating through the cabin. Jessica stepped back slightly, her confidence shaken by Karoline's unshakable composure, but Jessica quickly regained her composure. "Miss Leavitt, I'm not intimidated by threats," she said, her tone steady, though laced with a hint of sarcasm. Karoline didn't reply. Her silence spoke volumes, and the passengers could feel the shift in power, tilting toward Karoline. Emily, the junior attendant, stood at the edge of the cabin, watching with a mix of anxiety and resolve. She had noticed Jessica's attitude since the flight began, and her discomfort had only grown with the way Jessica was treating Karoline. Now, she knew she couldn't stay silent. Taking advantage of the distraction, Emily slipped toward the internal comms near the cockpit, pressing the button. Her hand trembled as she spoke into the system, her voice soft but firm. "This is Emily. We have a situation in the cabin." She returned to her spot, her face a blend of worry and determination, while Jessica remained unaware, her arms crossed and her anger simmering, though her authority was clearly waning. Karoline remained still, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to Jessica's building tension. Passengers watched closely, their eyes shifting between the two, uncertain of what would happen next. An older woman nearby leaned toward Karoline, whispering, "Miss Leavitt, are you all right?" Her voice full of concern. Karoline turned and offered a small smile. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied softly. The atmosphere in the cabin was thick with tension, broken only by the steady hum of the engines. Karoline sat upright, water still dripping from her clothes, but her gaze remained steady, focused on Jessica. She spoke with calm yet firm resolve. Jessica clenched her fists, stepping closer. "Miss Leavitt, I only ask that you follow the rules like everyone else. I don't see you as particularly deserving of special treatment," she said, her voice professional but tinged with sarcasm. The passengers exchanged glances, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The question hung in the air, how far would this go? Karoline's restraint wavered briefly. "You shouldn't have said that," she said, her tone sharp but controlled, her words carrying weight that left everyone on edge, anticipating what would come next. Jessica crossed her arms, her voice even but firm. "I've been very patient. Every action has consequences, and you should know that." Karoline narrowed her eyes slightly, her calm demeanor unshaken. "You're right," she said quietly, each word deliberate. Actions have consequences, and you'll see that soon enough. Jessica hesitated, Karoline's words stirring a sense of unease in her, but she quickly regained her composure. Miss Leavitt, she started, but the tension was palpable, and the quiet in the cabin made every word feel like it carried a heavier weight. Miss Leavitt, I'm not swayed by such talk, Jessica snapped, turning away in an attempt to regain her confidence. But beneath her feigned composure, doubt began to creep in. She knew she'd crossed a line, though she wouldn't admit it. The weight of the passenger's stays, Emily's worried expression, and Karoline's composed silence pressed on her. She tried to shake it off, repeating to herself, what if she's more than just a conservative politician? Karoline's behavior, her authoritative confidence, didn't match the stereotype of the conservative figure Jessica had so long disliked. For the first time, she found herself questioning her assumptions. Jessica couldn't understand why Karoline didn't lash out. Why had she calmly said that Jessica would regret her actions? A twist of unease curled in her stomach as Jessica realized her own bias and anger had driven her. She glanced around the cabin, searching for support, but found none. The businessman across the aisle stared at her, arms crossed, his gaze stern and silent. The older woman whispered to her neighbor, shaking her head in disapproval. Emily stood nearby, her hands trembling, clearly wishing she could vanish from the cabin. Karoline remained seated, her expression unreadable, radiating quiet confidence. She slowly crossed her legs and leaned back as if none of this affected her. The contrast between Karoline's calm and Jessica's growing unease was stark. Karoline didn't need to raise her voice or act out. Her silence spoke louder than any words could. Jessica's discomfort deepened as she realized the weight of her actions. The cabin felt heavier, the silence more oppressive. No matter how hard she tried to regain control, the feeling that her actions would have consequences lingered. Karoline's words echoed in her mind. You're making mistake. What Jessica didn't know was that Karoline had already signaled the crew earlier, and her calm response to the slap wasn't submission. It was strategy. Trouble was closing in, and Jessica was about to realize just how big a mistake she had made. Jessica paced near Karoline's seat, her frustration mounting. Karoline, in contrast, sat still, unruffled, as if the entire situation had no impact on her. Beneath the surface, however, Jessica could feel the weight of her actions pressing down on her. Without a word, Karoline raised her hand slightly to signal Emily, an unhurried, deliberate movement, then rested it back on the armrest. The simple gesture carried an unspoken power, making Jessica glance over, a sense of unease creeping over her. "What are you doing, Miss Leavitt?" Jessica asked, her tone sharp but still professional. Karoline didn't immediately respond. She simply leaned back in her seat, her composure unwavering. "You'll find out soon," she said quietly, her words heavy enough to heighten Jessica's anxiety. The cabin fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the steady drone of the engines. Passengers exchanged nervous looks, whispers spreading throughout the cabin. The older woman with the styled hair leaned toward her neighbor, murmuring, "What's happening here?" The businessman across the aisle remained quiet. His eyes narrowed as he appeared to piece something together. He lightly tapped his fingers on the armrest, his gaze never leaving Karoline, as if sensing that the full story was yet to unfold. Minutes later, the sound of footsteps echoed from front of the cabin, the cockpit door opening. The tension in the air grew thicker, signaling that things were about to change. The cockpit door swung open, and the pilot emerged, his face pale and tension etched across his features. He scanned the cabin briefly before striding directly toward Jessica, his step swift and resolute. Jessica turned, her irritation clear. "What's this about?" she asked, her tone sharp but still holding on to a semblance of politeness. The pilot stopped in front of her, his posture firm but faintly uneasy. "You need to step aside," he said, his voice steady. Jessica frowned, crossing her arms. "Excuse me? What do you mean?" "I'm handling this," she replied, visibly confused. The pilot glanced briefly at Karoline, then back at Jessica. "I just got word from management. The owner of this plane is on board, and it's her husband," he said, pointing at Karoline. His words hit the cabin like a thunderclap. Passengers gasped in unison, murmurs rippling through the air. The older woman exclaimed, eyes wide, darting between Karoline and Jessica. "Her husband owns this plane," she whispered, her voice thick with astonishment. The businessman nodded slightly, muttering, "I knew it," as if confirming a hunch he had kept to himself. Emily, standing near the galley, froze for a moment, then exhaled in relief. She realized that Karoline wasn't just a public figure. She was tied to power far beyond what anyone aboard could have imagined. Jessica stared at the pilot, her face flushing red before draining pale. "That's impossible," she stammered, her usual edge faltering. "There's got to be a mistake." The cabin air grew heavy. The steady hum of the engines was the only sound breaking the silence. Passengers exchanged anxious glances, the memory of the slap still vivid in their minds. Jessica stood near the aisle, arms crossed, trying to hold a defiant stance, but the unease creeping into her chest was undeniable. Karoline, on the other hand, remained seated, calm and poised. Her confident demeanor was unshaken. Suddenly, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be making an unscheduled landing. Please stay seated." The passengers buzzed with confusion as the plane began its descent. The businessman across from Karoline leaned toward her, whispering, "What's happening? Why are we landing?" Karoline didn't answer, her expression serene yet inscrutable. Jessica's brow furrowed, her confidence beginning to waver as she glanced toward the front of the cabin with growing concern. The plane touched down smoothly, and moments later, a sleek black SUV appeared on the tarmac. The door opened, and two sharply dressed aides stepped out, their strides swift and purposeful. They boarded the plane with quiet authority, drawing every eye as they entered the cabin. One of them spoke, his tone warm and respectful. "Miss Leavitt, everything's ready for your review." The passengers gasped again. Jessica stood rigid, her face ashen, the truth crashing over her like a wave. "Miss Leavitt," she mumbled, her voice faint. The aides ignored her, focusing solely on Karoline. "Do you need anything before we proceed?" one of them asked, his demeanor deferential. Karoline rose slowly, her movements graceful and deliberate. She adjusted her blazer, her calm radiating a strength that left the passengers watching in awe. Finally, Karoline spoke, her voice low and commanding. "I'm Karoline Leavitt," she began, her gaze sweeping the cabin. "This plane belongs to my husband, Nicholas Riccio." Jessica's mouth opened, then closed, speechless. The once assured attendant was now a pale shadow of herself, her earlier bravado replaced by panic. Karoline turned to Jessica, her voice cutting like a blade. "Jessica, your behavior today was disgraceful. You humiliated yourself, mistreated a passenger, and damaged this flight's reputation." Jessica stuttered, her voice trembling. I didn't know." Karoline raised a hand, silencing her. "You didn't know because you couldn't be bothered to treat me with the respect every passenger deserves," she said firmly. "Instead, you judged, acted on bias, and let this escalate, rather than handling it with basic professionalism." The passengers nodded in agreement, murmurs of support rising. Their eyes gleamed with admiration for Karoline. Mr. Henderson folded his newspaper, giving a slight nod of approval. Karoline stood tall, adjusting a blazer and locking eyes with Jessica with a calm but powerful gaze. "There was no mistake in your actions, Jessica," she said. Her voice low but unwavering silence settled over the cabin as Jessica's eyes darted around, desperately searching for any sign of support. But no one came to her defense. Passengers watched quietly, some subtly raising their phones to capture the moment. Karoline stepped closer, her tone even and unwavering. "Your job is to treat every passenger with respect, no matter who they are or what you think of them," she continued, her voice sharp and steady. "And now, the consequences have arrived." Jessica's hands clenched at her sides, her mind reeling. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come. The weight of everyone's stares crushed her, and for the first time, her confidence completely shattered. Karoline gestured to the pilot. "I want this resolved immediately," she said firmly, "and I want to ensure this never happens to anyone again." The pilot nodded, his demeanor professional. "Understood, Miss Leavitt." Jessica took a step back, panic rising within her. Her gaze flickered toward the exit, her instincts urging her to flee before things worsened. But the pilot moved forward, blocking her path. His expression was stern, unyielding. "You're not going anywhere," he said. Karoline looked directly at Jessica, her gaze unwavering and powerful. Jessica, your actions today show you're unfit for this role. As of now, you're fired, she declared, her words ringing out like a final verdict. Jessica's face twisted, her confidence evaporating completely. She stumbled back, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, Miss Leavitt," she begged. "I didn't mean." Karoline cut her off coldly. "You didn't mean to get caught," she said, her tone icy. "But you did, and now you face the consequences." Just then, 2 uniformed police officers boarded the plane, their presence causing murmurs to ripple through the cabin. Jessica's heart sank as they approached. "Miss Leavitt," one officer said respectfully, "we received your report. Do you wish to press charges?" Karoline didn't hesitate. "Yes," she replied firmly. "This person assaulted me in front of multiple witnesses. I want her held accountable." Jessica gasped, stumbling backward. "Wait, this is a misunderstanding," she cried, her voice desperate. "I didn't mean it." An officer advanced, pulling out handcuffs. You're under arrest for assault," he said. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in court." Jessica's breathing quickened as the reality set in. There was no escape. She glanced at Karoline, who stood calm and composed, a stark contrast to Jessica's collapse. Trouble had arrived, and Jessica knew she couldn't avoid it any longer. This was only the beginning of her reckoning. The passengers watched silently as Jessica was handcuffed, her tears streaming down her face as she struggled. "Please, Miss Leavitt, I'm sorry," she sobbed. Karoline's expression didn't shift. "Your apology means nothing without accountability," she said quietly. "You chose your actions. Now, face the consequences." All eyes followed as Jessica was led down the aisle, her once proud figure now a picture of defeat, arrogance replaced by regret and shame. Karoline turned to address the cabin, her voice steady and authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for what you witnessed today," she said. "This isn't the standard I expect on this flight. Going forward, we'll ensure every passenger is treated with the respect and dignity they deserve." The cabin erupted in enthusiastic applause. Mr. Henderson gave a soft cheer, and Mrs. Henderson set her knitting aside, clapping gently. Karoline turned to Emily, the junior attendant who had quietly supported her throughout the ordeal. "Emily," she said, her tone softening, "I noticed your professionalism today. Thank you for acting when it mattered. You will hear from my office soon about a better position." Emily's eyes widened, and she nodded quickly, her face lighting up. "Thank you, Miss Leavitt," she said softly, a hint of awe in her voice. Karoline gave a faint smile before moving toward the exit, her aides trailing behind her. The atmosphere on the plane shifted entirely. The initial tension gave way to admiration and relief. Justice had been served, and Karoline had set an example no one on this flight would forget. Passengers smiled as they witnessed the moment, a warm sense of unity spreading through the cabin. The older woman with the styled hair, who had watched the entire scene with curious eyes, leaned forward. "Leavitt, you are incredible," she exclaimed, admiration shining in her eyes. Karoline turned, offering a slight smile. "Thank you," she replied, her voice calm but strong. "Remember this, standing up for what's right is always worth it." As Karoline stepped off the plane, the open air of the tarmac greeted her. The sleek black SUV awaited, the driver opening the door with deference. Her aides flanked her, updating her on the next steps, but Karoline's mind lingered on the incident. Later, during a TV interview, she appeared in a modern studio, as poised as ever. The interviewer leaned forward, clearly captivated. "Miss Leavitt, your story's gone viral. Millions have seen how you handled this. What's your message?" Karoline looked straight ahead, her voice clear and resolute. "Respect is a right, not a privilege," she said. "Everyone deserves dignity, no matter who they are or what others think of them. True leadership sets that standard and ensures it's upheld." The interviewer nodded, visibly moved. "What would you say to those facing similar situations without your influence?" Karoline softened. "I'd say strength comes from within. Even if you feel unseen, know your worth. You don't need fame or wealth to demand respect. Just stand firm in who you are." Later that day, Karoline boarded another flight. This time, a new crew welcomed her with warmth and professionalism. The chief attendant smiled genuinely. Welcome aboard, Miss Leavitt. It's an honor to serve you. Karoline returned the smile, settling into her seat. The atmosphere felt lighter, the service flawless, and above all, steeped in respect. Looking out the window, she watched the tarmac fade as the plane took off, a sense of peace settling over her. That day's events left a mark not just on the passengers and crew who had witnessed it, but on everyone who had heard the story. Karoline knew she'd turned an injustice into a lesson that would ripple far beyond a single flight. Karoline smiled, knowing that the strongest victories aren't about winning, but about inspiring change. As passengers settled in, she quietly picked up her phone. After all, she realized this wasn't just a story. It was about shifting a system that tolerates bias and judgment. The plane climbed higher, cutting through the clouds, her window framing a vast horizon. The world below faded into a serene blend of blue and white, and Karoline felt a quiet triumph that nothing could shake.